I'm very grateful that this house made it safely through the storm. We can thank Elizabeth Muller and Mike Michaud for that. I don't know if you managed to miss. I don't know how you could have missed that enormous tree in the parking lot. And so Elizabeth was here keeping vigil. They were both running around checking for leaks. The building has leaked before in the past. And that huge tree came down. Mike was here with his crews, cutting that all up, moving it out of the way. It's amazing. So, I want to tell them that, right? I want to say when your ears were burning at 10:40 this morning, it's because we were sending out love and appreciation. Man. So we've been reflecting together on the mission of the church for these past several weeks. We've been reflecting on the urgency of this moment and planning for a future in which we draw a wider circle. Because we know that we can no longer expect people to find their way to this church on a Sunday morning. I mean, we can't expect great numbers of people to do that. Times have changed. Therefore, we have to open our arms and doors wider and to go out onto the highways and byways, as the early Universalist John Murray said, and gather them in and say, you might need this, and we certainly need you, and we need each other. We need strong networks. I said once that a church that isn't trying to be powerful is a church that is afraid to live into its calling. But the challenge is to build power wisely and well, and in partnerships. Going it together is powerful. It's also complicated and demanding, but ultimately worth the effort. Why are partnerships so demanding? Why is power building across organizational and geographical and demographic lines so challenging? Because of the way power works. That's why. Because of the way structures and systems are built and established over history that filter down into our individual sense of identity and our individual minds and souls that give some a sense of dominance, superiority. This sense of power imbalance may be subtle or it may be overt. Those whom power structures favor may and often do feel a sense of benevolence about their power and want to bestow some of it upon the less powerful, but usually on their terms. You can see, I'm sure, how even a benevolent superiority is an impediment to the creation of a community of equals, an impediment to radical hospitality. That's why the global church is in a period of self-examination about the dangers of the historically vaunted value of what we call charity, the charitable attitude and approach which perpetuates a distinct power imbalance among giver and receiver. We are moving, therefore, from models of charity to solidarity, understanding as we grow more aware of our interdependence that we are all needy. We are in interdependent systems that really cannot and should not be unwoven, and that all have gifts, wisdom, and strengths, and all have dysfunctions, weaknesses, and need. We are all the needy. I have a story about this, about my own searing moment when I realized that I was deeply infected by a sense of largely unconscious and unexamined superiority, and how I got corrected and converted. In 1988, when I graduated from university, I was ready to go out and save the world as a teacher. I wanted so much to teach, but there were no jobs. It was a recession. There was a recession. And I couldn't even get an interview anywhere. So I worked as a nanny and filled out God knows how many applications for jobs, high school jobs, junior high jobs, substitute teaching, anything I could find within a 50-mile radius or even wider of Evanston, Illinois, where I lived at the time. I wrote home for money a lot and, again, did not get called in for interviews. At the end of August of that year, when I had despaired of finding a real teaching job for the coming academic year, I saw a listing. A high school English teaching job at Proviso East High School in Maywood, Illinois. And my heart leapt up. I applied, and I got called in for an interview to the big, empty, beautiful stone school. I had driven an hour to get there, and I met the English department chair, a mild-spoken white man named Dick Klisch. He hired me, and I was ecstatic. I rented my first apartment in Oak Park, about 10 minutes from the school, and I began to teach. I began my in-teacher training about a week later. My first grown-up job. What I did not know is that Maywood is a small city of about 25,000 people that the locals referred to as the ghetto in the suburbs, and that the student body, which drew also from several of surrounding towns, was about 94% African American, 4% Latino, and 2% white. The per capita income in 2016 in Maywood, I looked this up, was $19,000. And in Lynn, where 21% of the population lives below the poverty line, there was a per capita income at the same time of about $23,000. So you can see the economic situation there. Swampscott at the same time was $54,000. I wanted to teach. I wanted to change the world one student at a time. I was not prepared. I was not prepared to grade papers written by 10th graders who were writing at a 4th grade level. I was not prepared for promising students who came to school with starving breath because there was no food at home. I was not prepared for security guards roaming the hallways, for gang fights in the parking lots, for guns in lockers, for students heading for prison. I was not prepared for the racism of some of the teachers, or for the racial tensions between the majority white faculty and the student body, which was comprised, again, as almost all young people of color. I was not prepared for the standoffs with the enraged kid, high as a kite, who threatened me and wouldn't leave the classroom until I called security. I was not prepared for the absenteeism or for the poverty, and for the education I received in what systemic racism looks like, how it violates dignity, how it tears apart families, how it operates in communities. I was not prepared to get a crash course in education in justice, taught to me by incredibly funny, bright, wise, resilient, talented black kids who frustrated me and broke my heart, but did not frustrate or enrage me nearly as much as the systems that were oppressing them. My 2 years at Proviso East were a graduate school course which I was paid to receive or to take. The lessons I learned from those teenage teachers of mine and their families shaped everything that came afterward. And they were the first to call me preacher lady, because I'd get going. You know, I'd talk to them about their futures, and I'd be like, come on, and you need to, nah, nah, nah. And they'd be like, preach, Ms. V. They put it in my head. It's a cliche to say that I received more than I gave, but it's also true. What I received, most valuable of all, was a new lens by which to see the world, a new and very important perspective. One semester, I assigned Judith Guest's novel, Ordinary People, to the students, so I think my juniors. This story is about a family, and there's also a famous movie of the same name, which was based on the novel. It's about a family from the Chicago suburbs, not that far geographically from where I was teaching, but very far economically and demographically, who experiences the death of one of their sons in a tragic boating accident. I saw Ordinary People as a novel about pain, loss, how people grieve in different ways, a novel about depression, about parenting. But as I taught it to my class, I became aware immediately that my students saw this as a story about white people, white families, and specifically about rich white people. They did not understand the isolation and alienation experienced by this mother, this father, and this son. Where are the aunties? They asked. Why don't these people cry together? Why is the mother so cold? Why can't her son tell her anything? Why can't she just let down her competitive expectations for him for a minute? Let him have some feelings. Why doesn't she support him dropping out of swim team if he needs to? The guy's brother's died. Her son has died. What's wrong with these people? It was rare for a book to get this much of a response from my classes, so I did a lot of listening. And one afternoon during the conversation about Ordinary People, a student said, "I feel so sorry for these rich white people." And everyone in the room, and they were very crowded classrooms. I think there were about 34, 36 students. Every one of them nodded and said, yeah, they're sad. And that was a conversion moment for me. When any unconscious superiority I had been holding on to got revealed and demolished, I got put in my place that day by compassion. I got put in my place being on totally equal ground with the students I was teaching and whom society and my upbringing had almost persuaded me were the needy, or the poor, or underprivileged, urban minorities, as opposed to kids with a valuable perspective and life experience, individuals, not at-risk youth, but people. This moment did not change any realities of these kids' poverty. It did not change the structural racism that pervaded the school, the policing and criminal justice system that so many of my students would interact with and get caught up in. It did not change the larger economic and social system into which they might graduate if they did manage to graduate and move out of Maywood. It changed me, though. It centered blackness. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to not be centered. It centered blackness and black family values and identified whiteness as a problematic identity. I had never even thought of whiteness as any kind of identity. And also, I did have a few Latino kids in that class as well. They were also completely on board with this perspective of these poor, rich white people. It gave me my first experience of being pitied, because unbeknownst to my students, I grew up in a family much like the Jarretts of Ordinary People, a secret-keeping family, emotionally violent, with an abusive and perfectionist parent. This moment shifted the power dynamic I had never questioned, where the economically privileged person is presumed to have all the benefits. That isn't true, and maybe I had known that before that moment, but I hadn't really known it, if you know what I mean. It pierced my heart. I realized that I was also the needy, and it was a radically equalizing experience. I did not go into Proviso East with a savior complex, or so I thought. I just wanted a job, or so I thought. I began to change and to question what whiteness is, to see it as an identity. And I became increasingly frustrated with my white friends who spoke of my job in pitying tones, as though I was doing this great sacrificial thing with my life by working in the community. Some of you may also experience that who work in communities like this. My students became a descriptor. poor black kids that Vicki works with. But other school kids in America, their school kids, for instance, were not white youth or weren't privileged kids. The most important factor, I have realized, in our ability to create partnerships is to understand that all groups have the tendency to depersonalize and categorize and objectify each other. And we have to actively work to dismantle that tendency and to prevent it. We are all people. We are all just people. To God, we are exactly the same. To the earth, we are exactly the same animals. This is going to seem like a weird pivot, but stay with me. Sometimes I unload contributions to the local food pantry, and I look at what people donate. And I sometimes see that they have donated the stuff that they are going to toss into the garbage anyway after cleaning out their pantry or their fridge. And here's what I mean by depersonalization. It is not intentional. It can exist alongside the best intentions. But sometimes I hold those things in my hand and I think like, wait, how busy and preoccupied would I have to be to think that this tin of expired sardines and tomato sauce is what someone hungry needs or wants to eat? Because you didn't feel like eating it in 6 years that you had it in your pantry. And again, depersonalization can coexist with the best intentions. But you can see how that phrase, the hungry or the needy, comes into our head, and it doesn't draw up mental maps of anyone who resembles us. Do you see? It becomes the needy that I'm helping, and then it's like, here's my expired, sauerkraut, or, half-eaten pasta. Because it's busyness, because it's frantic life, everybody's just rushing around, how can I help? And that's part of what we must do as a church, is dismantle that tendency and really work intentionally to not get into that place of depersonalization. It brings me, whenever I see some of that food, it brings me right back to the wide-eyed inquiries directed to me at cocktail parties when I was teaching at Proviso East. Vicki, tell us about your students. Tell us about the gang fight. And I want to go, well, tell me about your kid who got busted for marijuana possession. I mean, they're kids, they're teenagers. They're not different from your kids. This isn't a movie. I'm not Michelle Pfeiffer in Dangerous Minds. I don't know what you want me to say. Don't objectify them. They're not objects of curiosity. No one is. Meet them. Meet them in your communities. Know them. Become friends with them. They have names and stories and lives. We are the same. That's not just a sentiment. That is an ontological, scientific reality. This has always been one of the core missions of religious communities, to be aware of the inequities of the world and to try to right the imbalance. And it's right that that should be part of our mission here, too, at UUCGL. But whenever we or any other congregation ventures into a territory of righteous works, we have to make sure that it's from a place of care and friendship, respect, equal status, and solidarity rather than charity. Today, Scott Noka and Michael Salona will be presenting some information and thoughts about our Lynn partnership. Right after church, after coffee hour. And they'll be asking for your interest, for your involvement, the congregation, about help in your help in exploring these partnerships. They're also recommending, and the social justice ministry team is recommending, that everyone read a book called Toxic Charity by Robert Lupton. Again, moving from charity to solidarity. It's a good book and an easy read. This conversation will continue. It has been going on for a long time, but it will continue. Our work individually within our hearts will continue, and we will dismantle those assumptions, and we will learn together, and we will experience conversions together, and we will serve together, hopefully in rewarding partnerships with organizations that will be willing to reach out their hands to ours and to draw the circle wider. As Kenneth and the choir just sang, it's a long road we've set our feet upon, and with loving hearts, we walk on.